This is Pat House, and you're listening to the Matt Balaker podcast.
Thank you, fine people out there, for tuning in once again to the Matt Balaker podcast. I'd like you to encourage your friends, very kindly, of course, to like, subscribe, and share this program. Well, I am very excited about today's guest because in one sense, I've known him for a long time, but in another, we just sort of reconnected over the last few weeks. He's a well-known comedian from Philadelphia, not named Bill Cosby. He's headlined and opened for greats such as Greg Giraldo, Mark Maron, and Dave Attell. You got to check out his album, Biggest Thing, and his kick-ass podcast, I Guess I'll Do That. Please join me in welcoming Pat House to the program. How you doing, Pat?
What's up, man? Thank you for having me here.
Thanks for doing it. So I read in your bio that the first time you got on stage for stand-up was at Temple University event.
No, I was going to Temple.
Okay.
I was a Temple University student, and I started doing open mics. Yeah, I was a sophomore attending Temple, and I Googled stand-up. And well, actually, I attended a comedy show. Jay Okerson was the headliner, who's, you know, his own huge name now. He's from Philly. He told me where to go and who to talk to, and like 2 weeks later, I did. It's just kind of simple as that.
So sort of on a lark, 2 weeks later, you got up. Is this something were you planning it for like decades before, or what motivated you to get on stage?
Not decades before, but I mean, a couple years before. Yeah, I was obsessed with stand-up in high school, and I guess the thought was always in the back of my mind to try it, but didn't really know what to do. And then when I got into college, I started seeing comics on campus and seeing and meeting comics, and I was like, oh, I got to do this. And then I ran into Jay Okerson after a show on campus, and he told me to go to the Laugh House and introduce myself to this Philly comic who runs the open mic, and then I did. But yeah, the thought had been there for a couple of years by that point. Yeah.
So you had the comedy bug. It sounds. I mean, if you're going to shows and you're watching it in high school, who were some of the favorites that you had when you were a kid?
Oh man, it all started with Stephen Wright, essentially, who I just saw last week live. He did 90 minutes. It was incredible.
90, and that's 9. So for those who are unfamiliar with Stephen Wright, shame on you. Be familiar with them, but
yes,
90 minutes of Stephen Wright is like 20 hours of most modern day comics. But please go ahead.
90 minutes of jokes, well-crafted jokes, like 90 minutes of one-liners. They weren't all one-liners. He brought his guitar out and, you know, did his thing with that, but 90 minutes of jokes. I was obsessed with Dave Attell, Insomniac. I loved Insomniac. And then I get the time when I was in high school and early college, Comedy Central Presents was a big show where a whole bunch of comics had a half-hour special. And a lot of those comics are huge now. I mean, Brian Regan, Nick Swardson, Wanda Sykes, Maria Bamford. These people weren't names then, and they all had a half-hour special, and I couldn't get enough of this series. And there was also Premium Blend on Comedy Central, where a bunch of comics were doing 4 and 5 minutes. So I was obsessed with those shows. But primarily in the beginning, it was Stephen Wright, Dave Attell, Lewis Black, and then anybody else who was on Tough Crowd. I loved Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn, and then I became obsessed with like Giraldo, Laurie Kilmartin. There was so many comics that fed in through from there. And then a brand new club in Philly called Helium just opened, and a bunch of those Tough Crowd comics came down to Philly, and then my mind just absolutely exploded.
Your mind exploded from. I love that because
I'm just seeing these comics. Yeah.
I mean, Tough Crowd really galvanized a lot of people. A lot of comics today kind of point to that as what got them really motivated to do stand-up. So who were some of the first Tough Crowd comics that came to Helium?
Patrice and Giraldo come to mind first, but also Nick DiPaolo, even Colin Quinn came down to Philly.
I think Colin Quinn, you know, those who know comedy know how good he is. but
oh God,
I still think he's underrated. He's not just a funny performer. He's like kind of a philosopher.
You're absolutely right. And also he's a stand-up that has had numerous Broadway one-man shows. And he's still a comedy club comic. I mean, even back in, was it late 90s or early 2000s, he had one called An Irish Wake.
And he had Unconstitutional. I mean, his stuff
which I saw that live. That was fantastic. Then he had, oh man, the book's in this closet behind me. Shit.
And then I think he's working on one called like The National Divorce. I mean, he's always putting out something.
Yeah, he's prolific, man. Absolutely prolific. And I think Seinfeld was the producer for most of those productions, I believe. Yeah.
I mean, on one hand, Colin Quinn is I mean, he is like kind of an everyman. Like he treats people really well. He never acts big time, but then, I mean, since the 80s, he was on MTV. He's like tight with Seinfeld. Remote control. I mean, he could be a total douchebag, and maybe he should, but he hasn't. I don't know what's up with him.
Not at all.
And I wonder, I mean, we can play pop psychologist, Pat. I have an unproven theory that I think more stand-ups are not douchebags because they have to interact directly with the audience. Like if a joke bombs, you know it then and there. If you're an actor or, you know, a writer, you're kind of separated from the audience reaction. What's your take, sir?
I would agree with that. I mean, when you're a comic and you're on stage and a joke doesn't go well, there's only one person standing on that stage. You know what I mean? But acting is such an unfamiliar world to me. But I mean, I understand that, you know, those cowards are hiding behind somebody else's lines.
That's true. Well, you weren't a coward. You got up, and I want to kind of go back to your story, Pat. So you took the stage after this Temple opportunity.
Yeah.
What was it like? You know, because there's this initial euphoria. I'd imagine, like, okay, I did it, but then what?
I went to the Laugh House on October 13th, 2004, and did my first open mic, and it was hook, line, sinker. I went back to that open mic every single Wednesday for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then I just networked. I made friends who told me about other places to go and what stages to jump on and, you know, go here, go there. Oh, I'm doing this thing next Thursday, or so-and-so runs an open mic over here. It's 30 miles away, but you should check it out. And like when you're young and hungry, you'll do anything. So literally from that first set, I did the open mic at the Laugh House every Wednesday for 2 or 3 months. And then once I met a couple people, man, I was like getting on stage 6 nights a week for like the next 5 or 6 years, probably.
Wow. So
I was a lunatic.
Yeah. I mean, you got, I don't think people realize, like, you know, it takes about 8-9 years to be a doctor. I think it takes 10-15 years to be a comedian. Like a good, I mean, like,
it's true.
What say you?
Was it Jay Leno who says you have to be on stage 5,000 times just to figure out what you're doing? And then someone else said it takes 10 years to figure out what you're doing. And I feel like that's 100% true. Like, I'm not tooting my own horn here or saying I'm good, but I mean, like, essentially.
I'll say it. He's very good. Check him out. But go ahead.
I don't feel like I got good until about 10 years in because, you know, you have to hit the road a little bit and do a whole bunch of different markets and figure out that people in Portland, Oregon are different from people in Boston and, you know, do a couple things. But even just getting on stage and getting reps and doing material all the time, like, I really feel like it takes a good decade just to get your bearings. And I hate when people say, you know, their friend tried stand up one time and he sucked. It's like, yeah. Yeah. I started at the club called the Laugh House, and that's where Kevin Hart started. And the host of the open mic used to say Kevin was not good when he started. Like,
I mean, he wasn't an expert his first time out.
Yeah, he wasn't doing Chase credit card commercials a weekend. So
he wasn't hanging out with Dwayne Wade courtside.
Absolutely. Or getting on the Super Bowl field after the Eagles won the Super Bowl. That was... Yeah, it drives me nuts when people think that, like, you can think you're funny, but like once you get into the clubs and get on stage, like, you know, your ass gets handed to you, and it takes a long time to get good and figure stuff out.
Yeah. What are some of the rough lessons you've learned from your days as a stand-up?
I'll tell you a great lesson I learned. I started in a black comedy club, and that taught me one thing is that you had to be funny right away.
Mhm.
Like you need something as soon as you walk onto that stage, you have a very short window to say something funny. And that's always something I kept in my back pocket, regardless of the crowd. But I can tell you from working black rooms, that they want funny right away. And it's such an awesome lesson to learn. Like go out there and be funny right away.
That's a great lesson. And it's also, I think it's important to do shows where you're the minority.
Yes.
I mean, it's kind of easy because a lot of us, we grow up in an area where people kind of look like us, kind of act like us. And so it's not like malicious. You just do the local open mic.
Absolutely.
But once you break out of that, it can be very eye-opening. So yeah, what are some of your takeaways from working, you know, when you're the minority on stage?
Well, I earlier in my career, I met a lot of black comics and would do a lot of black rooms in like North and West Philly, and people would be like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "I'm a comic." Like, who brought you here? And I would name a comic. Like, oh, okay, that's cool. And then like people would have my back because they know I'm the odd man out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I had a bunch of people look out for me. I remember one time I did a show at a bar called the Rusty Nail at 29th and Girard in deep North Philadelphia. It was a bad neighborhood. I literally got out of my car. There were police helicopters with their fucking.
You're like, all right, that means I'm at the right place.
Giant spotlights. And I walk in, and it was like the room stopped and everybody stared. And the manager came up to me. His name was Frank. He's like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "My name's Pet. I'm one of the comics." And then Frank was like by my side the entire night. He's like, "If anybody looks at you weird, come get me. Anybody says anything, come get me." And I was like, this is kind of scary, but also kind of cool.
Yeah. So what was that show like?
It was fine. It was just a bar show. I mean, it was just a bar show, but I was the only white person for probably miles. But just though the things I learned in the beginning was like those crowds, those audiences at the Laugh House and whatnot taught me to be funny right away. And also the age-old experience of, or advice rather, of just writing and getting on stage as much as you can. Like once I was like a year or year and a half in and networked and met people, I found out there was stage time in Philadelphia, South Jersey, and Delaware, like around the Philadelphia area, 6 or 7 nights a week, and I was out 6 or 7 nights a week.
Yeah, I mean,
So I was just
there's
getting
no
on
substitute
stage.
for experience. But what is your writing process like?
Oh, sporadic. I write a lot of notes in my phone. Like I try to just take stuff from everyday life. So if I'm going about my day and something funny happens, I just put a note in my phone, like crazy woman at CVS, or like Starbucks order took too long. If something funny happened, like just things like that, regardless of topic throughout my day. And then later on, I go back and sometimes I hand write stuff out or put like voice memos into my phone, but then I try to, you know, recall it and make it funny from there. But I pull from everyday life and try to just make what really happened funny.
Yeah, so you want to make what really happened. So you're basing it in reality, which I think is a strong
Absolutely.
place to pull from.
All comedians fabricate a little bit, and you know we use colorful adjectives, and you know, I get fabricate a little bit, but like if I tell a story or a bit, like 90% of it is true, and the parts that aren't true, the joke is so far-fetched, or the analogy, you know that part's not real, but with the whole bit in itself, you know it's a true story.
You know, it's a true story. And I think that's important because you're not on like trial when you're up there. You know, it's not like you're going to get perjured for saying this girl was, 23, but she was 27 or something like that. You know, I mean,
exactly.
People tend to like call you out. It's like, all right, like,
or like I was there. That wasn't a Wednesday. You're like, Jesus Christ. I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry that was on a Friday and I said Wednesday in the bit. Like,
it's so annoying. But yeah, it's like you got to be truthful. You got to be truthful. I mean, I think your opinion has to be truthful, but the facts
but not.
of this setup, it's like, come on.
Also, you have to you have to like exaggerate a little bit to be funny. I mean, the truth in itself is funny, but when you tell the truth, you have to compare it to things or make an analogy or make a reference. You know what I mean? So
And
you
it
tell
has to
them
be
what happened and then you hit them with something else on the side.
right. You have to misdirect a little bit. But I think a lot of the best comedy, it has to come from the first person. So even if something happened to your friend or your cousin or whatever, you have to make it about you, because generally it's not as relatable to the audience.
I know, and that's the biggest one of the biggest crosses we bear as comics, when people are like, I had the funniest thing happen to me, you can use it. Be like, I can't.
It's not coming from me.
It happened to you.
You should put that in your act. That's I think every comic's favorite saying, right?
Yeah, and I'm working on this thing now. It's like, when is the hotel desk gonna stop making jokes to the comic? Like you check in, like, oh, you're the comic. Funny thing happened. It's like, oh my god, can you please just give me the room key, please, please, please.
Just say you're an accountant.
Exactly.
I'm a phlebotomist. I draw blood. Let's make small talk about that. So you're not only a purveyor of jokes, you're also a purveyor of booze. And I think bartenders are the original and maybe the best therapists. I'd like to know what are
against our will.
Against you're not paid enough for that, but people share everything. What are some lessons or stories you've gathered from your days behind bar?
Oh my god, this is an impossible answer because I have so much material. I mean, all my albums, I have at least 10 to 15 minutes of bartending stories, and I still get new ones all the time. Not a single day goes by at work where I don't write something down. Oh man, it's an impossible question because something literally happens every single day.
Yeah, well, I think yesterday you posted or recently about some guy who ordered like $18 worth of drinks and gave you 20, and he's like, keep part of the change.
Well, yeah, okay. What happened with that was, it did happen the other day, and a guy got $17 worth of drinks. I gave him $3 change. He took $2 back, left me a $1 tip, and then he wanted to talk about stand up, and I was like, no.
No.
And like I wonder if I liken that to like sex work. Like, there are probably legit sex workers or prostitutes that think men are going to do whatever with them for a cheaper price, and like, no, bro.
Yeah.
No, like, if you want to talk about stand up, it's going to cost more than $1.
I know my rate. I'm a professional.
Yeah, you're not going to get a BJ for less than $100. So it's not the same thing, but it kind of is.
Yeah, you're like, I'm not going to give you a minute.
Funny, I'm actually gonna do this tonight. Actually, I haven't said this on stage yet.
A BJ for $100.
Well, the whole entire juxtaposition of the $1 tip versus a real woman in the sex work industry.
So you've worked in at bars and stand up. Have you ever had a real job?
Well, I've been at the same job. I've been bartending at the same place for 19 years.
Wow. And by real job, I mean, like, you have to wear a tie and you hate it. So
for 6 months. For 6 months.
What was that?
I worked in payroll for a chain of supermarkets. And I got a joke from that my first day. I was like, it's called 9 to 5 because 9 was the number of times I thought about killing myself, and 5 was the number of times I've tried. And then I was like, you're wearing a noose to work, like they're doing the work for me. Yeah, that lasted 6 months. And
I think I'd much rather do stand up than payroll.
Yeah,
you made a smart choice.
I was bartending part-time at the time at the place where I currently am, and it just so happened the planets aligned. And when I quit that desk job, someone was leaving the golf course where I was bartending. So very shortly after I left that job, I had a full-time job bartending. So that was the universe throwing me something, but it worked out well.
Thank you, universe. And
exactly.
You were, at least in terms of people I know and comedians, pretty early to the podcast game. Like, what motivated you to start your podcast?
It's like, I mean, it had been sitting on my mind for a long, long time, but honestly, the pandemic got me to get the wheels in motion like everybody else. We weren't doing shows and we weren't hanging out. So the podcast was a way to talk to comics and have the green room chat that we weren't able to have.
You're so natural at it. Like I really enjoy your podcast, and I think one thing I'm kind of jealous of is the name. I mean, people ask me like, "How did you come up with the Matt Balaker podcast?" And I was like, everything else was taken. Like,
Oh, that's hilarious.
what was
Thank
that?
you.
Was that your first choice, or where?
No,
What's
it
the story
wasn't, and I can't remember what the first one was. It was like an abridged version, or I shouldn't say. It was like it was like a shorter version of I guess I'll do it, because that's like I like short. I like short and to the point.
Mhm.
But I guess I'll do it with Pat House made it is a good play on words. And on every podcast I talk about why comedians got into stand up, and that's their I guess I'll do it moment. So it's a nice play on words, but it really is just how we got into it, how my guest got into it. Like, I guess I'll do it.
It's natural. Like, yeah, I guess.
Natural. I mean, whether
So
every comic had a moment where they decide to step on stage. So what was that moment?
I think that's such an interesting time, because on one hand, like you mentioned earlier, even Kevin Hart, no one is good immediately, and comics have this like kind of blend of narcissism and insecurity. Like, it's something I like to talk about on stage. It's like, on one hand, like, secure people don't go up at 1:30 a.m. at a bar open mic, to try to get attention from,
to win people over.
but then you have to be confident enough to think you're worthy of that stage time. I mean, you've interviewed a bunch of comics. What are some takeaways you've gleaned from this subculture?
We're all weird. That's what I get from all of it. Like, comedy's such a weird thing. Like, we all are kind of insecure people, but we're all like, I'm fucking funnier than that guy. So we all dwell in this weird space of being insecure people, but knowing that we're funny. We're a weird bunch.
And then it's like and now that I'm older, I think running shows help this. Like, I can really enjoy other people crushing, especially if it's a show I produce. But the first few years when you're doing open mics, like, you have your friends, but then I noticed there's someone else who's doing really well. God, the insecurity is what would eat me. It's like, they're like, all right, is that person gonna make it and I'm not? And like, these thoughts just kind of
and I don't know if the insecurity ever even goes away. Just the other night, I had a show in Atlantic City in front of 500 people, and it went fine, but I didn't love it. And I still walked off stage like, nah, I'm not going to meet anybody or try to. I don't feel good about that. So I'm just going to go back to my hotel room, watch TV till I fall asleep.
and there's no, I mean, it's a lot like an addiction. There's no perfect set. I mean, people could have like these, I think of like Chris Rock's Bring the Pain. I mean, to me, it's like as close to perfection as you could get, or even some of Greg Giraldo's specials. Is like, I really don't see any way to improve it. I'm sure if you asked him, they'd be like, "Oh, I fucked up this line," or there's always something to tweak.
Yes, and then like I found that like every time I recorded an album, and I did this material for like 2 years straight. It took me 2 or 3 years to get this whole entire 45, 55 minutes. The day after I record the album, I think of the most perfect tag for something, and it's too late. And then Ted Alexandro, great comic, told me that's always the case. You could spend 3 years working on material and film a special. Get the whole camera crew out, you rent a theater, you film it, you're at, the shit can in Topeka, Greg Giraldo reference.
Yep.
And then you will think of a tag or a way to fix something in a joke, and you're like, man, the joke's 10 times better, but I'm a day late and $1 short.
And there's no way you could ever, because anyone who goes to your
but
show,
that's comedy, so it's comforting knowing it's never going to be the way you want it to be.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, you teeter on the line of perfection, Pat, and I think that's what makes you such an artist. Yes. Well, we connected. And I guess there are two friends. We have mutual friends, Christina P. And then when I was writing the Greg Giraldo book and had enough where like I knew I needed help, I sent it to you sort of on a whim, and you were really helpful in giving feedback. And I think the first thing you said is, "I'm not a book critic," and I thought, perfect. This book
exactly.
It's not for. I mean, it's for people like you. I mean, you're in many ways the target. So that was super cool of you. But then I learned through that you got to work with Giraldo a few times. Can you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't remember if we talked about this on my podcast episode because I want to make it about my guest.
Sure.
But let me preface it by saying that did I tell you the story of how I met Greg the very first time?
Well, let's, millions of people are tuning in. So, for their sake, let's share with them, please.
And I don't want to tell a 5-hour story here, so I will make this as short and quick as possible. There was a show in Philadelphia in May of 2006 called Comedy Central Live. It was Greg Giraldo, Bill Burr, and Mike Birbiglia. And me and my friend Dave had bought tickets just as fans.
Mm-hmm.
So I lived in the city near where the venue was. And I'm walking there, and my phone rings. It's a number I don't recognize, so I don't answer. Well, they leave a voicemail, and it's Mike Berkowitz, who was the manager of, I guess, Birbiglia, a couple of the guys. He's like, hey, we're looking for a host. We called Helium Comedy Club, and they said you were going to be there. We'd be wondering if you wanted to host. And I'm standing on the street corner of 16th and Callowhill, like, what the fuck? Like, is it real? I'm like thrown in a tornado, and it's crazy. So I call Mike back and say, yes, I'm in. And then we walk to the Electric Factory. He tells us where to go. And I wait by the back door. And a few minutes later, they pull up. Mike, Bill Burr, and Greg Giraldo all get out of the car. And 2 hours later, I was on stage in front of about 2,000 people for the very first time. And I got to host that whole entire show.
Wow. So 2,000 people were in attendance. Up until that point, Pat, what was the biggest venue you played at?
Well, I wasn't even a host at the Laugh House or Helium yet. Okay. So I'm saying the biggest crowd I ever performed of was maybe 150 people on like one of those fluke nights where the open mic gets packed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I got thrown to the wolves. And then I will never forget, I did my best 10, probably the only 10 minutes I had, period. Mm-hmm. And we're at a 2,000 seat theater, and I'm tripping my balls off. I'm not on drugs, but like I have seen all my favorite bands here. I saw Green Day here, the Foo Fighters. So I'm on this stage, and I look to my right, and there's Birbiglia, Giraldo, and Burr just standing there watching me. And I was just like, what is happening? But I did well, and we got to hang out afterwards. But yeah, man, I walked to the show as a fan, got literally the dream phone call, and then got to open that show and work with all of them.
So you actually went from the line to the stage. What did your friend think about this?
Dave was like, this is insane. I was like, I know.
And Dave stayed in the audience, or did he come backstage with you?
He came backstage after the show, but he sat in the crowd for the show.
So I think that's pretty amazing that those three guys were even watching your set, because I've hosted enough shows where I could say anything and they wouldn't even know because they're looking at their own notes. But to actually have that experience,
yeah, this was like a pretty good sized theater, and they knew I was a newbie, so they were probably just figuring out, the shit they were going to have to clean up when I was done in case I tanked.
So, other than kind of that intersection of preparation and opportunity, what did you learn from that experience?
Well, I was so new and I only had that 10 minutes, so I just did everything I could and tried to do the best I could, but they all assured me that I did well. And then, I had some bragging rights in Philly for a while.
I would say so.
Like when word got around, it was pretty cool for a couple of weeks. Like, oh my God, you hosted the Greg Giraldo, Bill Burr thing. I was like, yeah, no big deal.
So did you think that when you did local shows or open mics that they'd roll the red carpet out for you? Or
no, I would never have that mentality. But I mean, at the same time, in the back of my mind, I'm like, do you know what I did last week? Yeah, I'm at, Joe's Jerk Off Bar and Grill. But 2 weeks ago, I was in front of... Truly wild. You know what? I mean, in terms of like something that's personal and meaningful, like, I've done a lot of cool shit in my career, and a lot of things have made me very happy and have been validating. But that's still... Even though I was 2 years in, and this was 16 years ago, that still might be the coolest thing that ever happened to me. I've been lucky enough to work with Dave Attell and Greg Giraldo and other comics, and record an album and, do a theater with Segura or Sebastian, and all that's cool. But I got the call to like open for 3 heavy hitters at a theater, and something about that just holds so much more weight. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's that and being on the Matt Balaker podcast. It's going to be neck and neck for the rest of your career, Pat.
It's all downhill from here.
It's all downhill from here. So that was the first time you worked with Giraldo, but didn't you have other experiences with him?
Yeah, I hosted his last week at Helium in Philadelphia. He was getting ready to tape Midlife Vices, so he was basically running his hour that whole weekend, and he was just murdering. All the shows were sold out. There was electricity in the room, and I remember as the host, I was still new. I was like 4 or 5 years in. New in terms of like,
right.
The club just finally saw me as a host, but I had really good sets. These crowds were just primed and ready, but I had caught him a bunch of times when he came to Helium before. Like I was always hanging in the back watching, because when Greg came to town, me and all my friends would go to Helium and have to sit in the back of the room because we have to watch Greg.
Right. Yeah, that's speaking of Ted Alexandro. I interviewed him for the book, and
Farewell Maestro.
Yeah, it's like everyone would just kind of stop, and I mean, there's so few. It tells another one, but there aren't many where people just stop what they're doing and pay attention to that performer.
Yeah.
So you really got to work with some greats, and what are some lessons you learned from them?
There's so much advice I've gotten over the years, and it all comes to a head. Like like back when people bought CDs, I had my first CD, I don't know, 8-9 years ago. Tom Segura and Jackie Cation told me to sell it for $20, and CDs were on the way out,
right?
Because Apple and iTunes and all that stuff was rapidly getting more and more successful, but people were still buying CDs here and there, and they're like, sell for $20. People saw you live. They enjoyed your set. They're meeting you. It's an experience. Sell it for $20. And honestly, I had some really good weekends where I would sell a CD for $20, and even as like the feature act, come home with an extra $300 or $400.
Oh, it's
which
great.
Makes a difference. Which makes a difference.
It feels like millions too. It's like bonus money.
So many lessons, just learning how to like pace yourself more and take your time, and even just trying new stuff in the middle. And like, you're opening for a big name and you want to crush, but you still have to work the new stuff, and like just getting more comfortable. I just love even talking to comics and just listening to what they have to say.
Yeah,
whether it's advice or not, or even just watching them and being like, oh wow, he knew that bit wasn't going to work, but he's still committed to the whole entire thing. Like, you learn as much by watching. It might not
work, but if you don't commit to it, it'll never have a chance. I remember
absolutely
on that kind of train of thought. One of your guests was Alonzo Bowden, and he was a regular at a show I ran for several years in the kind of from 2006 to 2012. And one thing I learned from watching him is just to exhale a little bit. Like, he was so comfortable with silence. I mean, he could, he didn't try to like boom, boom, boom. And that was really hard for me. I mean, I still struggle with it, but just to be able to have some moments where you don't say anything for even a few seconds, and
to regain your, where you want to go next. But I've said this before too to people, like, as a comic, you obviously want to crush and get those thunderous laughs. But I love when I'm doing a setup and the crowd is so quiet because they're hanging on every word. Mm-hmm. Like, I think the attention and having the whole room at your fingertips is just as cool and just as euphoric as that laugh when you fucking hit them.
Oh yeah, because you're the conductor. You know what joke you're doing now, and you also know the next one. And I think that, I mean, for me, that's probably the most fun part of performing.
Yeah. It really is the silence, even though you're talking, you're doing the setup. When they're listening like that and hanging on your every word, the silence is just as important and as cool as the payoff when the laugh hits. When the punchline hits. My main husband and dad joke now that I tell my wife is, if she gets upset if I'm doing like weeknight shows late, I was like, it's a chance to get listened to, honey. It's like partly joking, but it's kind of rare to just have people pay attention to you. Yeah.
And then it's like a drug, and you keep chasing it.
Yeah.
Would you wish stand-up comedy like on your loved ones? Because it's obviously brought in you a lot of happiness, but there's also a lot of pain with it. Like what?
I mean, it's a long ride. I mean, it's a long, I don't know. Yeah, it's fun, but it's the same thing. Of like, I have friends who are like golf pros or musicians, and they're all in the same boat. I mean, I have friends who are in their 40s who are still doing professional amateur golf tournaments and making money. You know what I mean? So
Right.
it's like, no matter what your endeavor is, as long as you love it and care about it and it's your passion, then yeah, I would say go for it, because we all take beatings, you know. My friends who are musicians who make money, who have done corporate gigs and travel, still have the bar gig that blows every now and then. Or so it's all, anybody getting into their passion project is still going to face some stuff. You know what I mean? Like that, do what you love, you never work in your day. You do what you love, you never work a day in your life. That's so fucking dumb. That's so inaccurate.
What would be a more accurate way of saying that?
Do what you love and you might be happier, but there's still a lot of shit along the way. But there's good nights in between.
Let's put that on a bumper sticker, Pat.
Actually, I was actually thinking that's actually kind of not bad.
You can sell that after your shows because no one buys CDs, but for $20.
Yeah, absolutely. Now you have to, like, I don't even know how to make money after shows anymore.
So what's something, whether it's comedy or otherwise, where you've changed your mind on?
Like, what do you mean? Like, change my mind on what? Like,
well, we're all like so headstrong when we're in our 20s. We might think like, so some people, it might be a political thing, or you might be the Phillies fan, and then you start rooting for the Braves, or me, like I still have Freddie Mitchell, and I'll defend him, but I'll realize he's not the great NFL receiver I thought he was going to be coming out of UCLA. So it can be on the mundane or the philosophical. But
wait, is Freddie Mitchell 4-28 or 4-26?
He's fourth down Freddie.
Yes. He golfs where I bartend sometimes.
I went to UCLA, like we overlapped at UCLA, and I just loved watching him. And I remember talking so much shit, saying how he was going to be the next great short receiver, and he flamed out of the league. Years.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Was kind of a train wreck, but he talked more trash than he talked more trash than T.O.
T.O.
Yeah.
Freddie Mitchell golfs. I don't see him often, like once, maybe twice a year, but I've had him at my bar and my country club numerous times. And I'm not the biggest NFL fan. I watch the Eagles in passing, but I was doing a club in Appleton, Wisconsin. And then I had to do radio in the morning, and they wanted to talk about Freddie Mitchell, and I had like nothing to say. I didn't know what they were talking about, and I was so embarrassed because I was there to just do radio to plug my shows, but they're talking about Freddie Mitchell.
Yeah, that's a curveball
because it was just south of Green Bay.
Okay,
and I was like, "Oh, I got nothing here." I did not think we'd be talking about Freddie Mitchell today. That's hilarious.
Yeah, I should have sent you. I'm like, we're in 20 minutes of Freddie Mitchell talk.
Was it 4-26 or 4-28?
I think it was like fourth down 20. I mean, who knows?
Okay.
I remember McNabb just like threw a Hail Mary, and
Yep. I mean, I remember this, but I'm just not the guy that's going to retain all that kind of information. But I think there are still cards here with bumper stickers that say 4th and 26 on it, or 4th and 26.
Well, God bless Freddie Mitchell. Well, I'd like to get your thoughts, Pat, on how comedy has changed from when you started to right now.
Oh, well, I mean, the pandemic put so much stuff online. I mean, the rise of TikTok and Instagram Reels, and in the past 2 years, the online comedy has beyond skyrocketed. And it's not a bad thing, but I mean, you see so many YouTubers and TikTok comics headlining comedy clubs, and then people like you and me and a million of my friends who came up through the bar open mics and the clubs, who never had to do that or never worked that angle, are maybe a little bit off to the wayside because we don't have 500,000 followers who are going to come to the comedy clubs. So that's the biggest change, obviously. And then it's just weird. I've seen a handful of of these online comics that headline shows, and it's like it's not great, and it really sucks when you are a comic that is through and through a stand-up that has taken the beatings and worked through the ranks and had to fight the host at the club and try to work the road. Just see these dumb bullshit up there.
I guess the question
and I don't mean that to sound bitter.
Oh no, not at all.
But I mean,
I'm bitter, but
that's a very very common theme within stand-up right now. I mean,
like in LA, I saw a lot of like Jackass stars, like people from the movie Jackass who would do stand-up, and they're charismatic, funny people, but it doesn't always translate well. I mean, you can maybe get away with it for a few minutes, but I guess the question is, are you going to get asked back, and will people pay to see you the second time?
I mean, I think you're always going to get asked back if you can put people in the seats. You know what I mean? I mean, I don't know. You might be able to go on stage and light a dog on fire, but if you're going to sell out 7 shows at 300 people each, they're going to have you back. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you have to cross the PETA protest lines and ignite that pooch.
Steve-O has made a career out of it because he's also a very smart businessman. But yeah, I know a couple of the Jackass guys dabbled in stand-up, and it's just weird, and you feel slighted as a comic who came up through the rankings and tried to get on stage every single night, and then you have somebody at their at home in their bathroom talking about their favorite dildo, and it gets 3 million views.
Right,
they're selling out clubs. You know what I mean?
Maybe I'm talking about the wrong dildo. I gotta
exactly.
I gotta up my game. Pat, what do you know now that you wish you knew 14, 15 years ago?
Well, that's a very good question. What do I know now that I did not know 15 years ago? That that is a very good question. Give me 1 second.
I'm flattered.
I'm really happy to know that, like, I guess that it's okay to bomb. Let me, like, when your first couple years of your career, when you bomb, you sit on it for days. And now when I bomb, like, I don't care. Like, I know this stuff is funny, or maybe it was brand new and it wasn't working, but, like, early in your career, that would ruin a couple days for you until you got on stage and redeemed yourself. And now, hey, I had a set last night. I didn't care for it all. Dude, 2 minutes later, it was out the window. Like, that doesn't affect you anymore. You also, especially in your early days, you learn more from a bomb than you do when stuff goes well. If you have a great set, you go home happy. Hey, everything worked. It's great. But if you have a bomb, you're like, okay, back to the drawing board. What went wrong? Was it them? Was it me? Did I start too dark? Did I have a bad opening joke? Whatever. But I'm glad I hit a point now to where, like, rough sets really don't bother me because I trust myself and my career that, it's not going to play mind games with me like it would have earlier on.
That's a really good point. I mean,
it takes a long time to get there. It takes a long time to get there.
And it's not just stand up. I mean, being able to, like, turn the page on any tough situation is just going to make you a more well-adjusted person.
Yeah, I've had rough, obviously, open mics. I've had rough hosting sets. I've had rough feature sets. And even in the minimal headlining work I've had rough 45 minutes. And, you come off stage and you're like, all right, I lived.
Yeah, I lived. Yeah, exactly.
I lived. It wasn't the best, but
jumping on grenades. It's just jokes.
Absolutely. And then if you can stand up there for 45 minutes, eat it, and still have material that you didn't do, you're in the clear.
That's my favorite. Like last weekend, I probably forgot like 9 minutes.
It's a good chunk of time. That's a good chunk of time.
And I was kind of like, oh, well, that was an okay set, but it could have been better. I was like, oh, but if I would have remembered those 8-9 minutes, then it would have been an amazing set. And it probably wouldn't have, but it's this psychological trick I play on myself. And what you said, Pat, about like bombing or going through difficult times on stage reminded me of what Sam Tripoli said to me a long time ago. He said, don't worry about trying to please everyone on stage. He's like, and I think that took me a while to, I appreciate it now. It took me years, but like, it's kind of better if there's some people who really don't get you or don't like you, because when you're doing anything creative, you kind of want to find your crowd and not just kind of be milquetoast for everyone.
For everybody, yeah. I still struggle with that big time. I put a a video on Instagram the other day, and I've had a few people say things about it to me. It's about gluten-free people and how annoying they are. But it's only a joke. It's only a joke. I know there are gluten-free people everywhere, but I've had 3 people in the past week actually say something to me about it. And it's like, they know I'm kidding, but like that hits close to home for them.
It does.
And it's like, it's not...
They're worse than the CrossFit folks. I mean, gluten-free is serious business, Pat.
They're up there with like vegan atheists.
Oh, they will never shut up. Like, I respect your beliefs or lack thereof, but can we put a pin on it, please? So we'll have to have you back because I could talk to you for days.
Oh my God, absolutely.
But what are you most optimistic about?
In my career, or for comedy in general, or for the world?
However you want to answer it. Yeah.
I'm optimistic that I will hopefully get the chance to headline and maybe have a fan base. Like, I am going to hit the ground running hard soon and really try to book up next year crazy and keep on top of my website and the podcast and other sorts of promo to really build up next year. And, you know, I don't look at my heroes as like Chris Rock or Jerry Seinfeld. Like, my heroes are Chad Daniels and Dan Cummins and Laurie Kilmartin. Like, those, Ted Alexandro, those are my heroes. Jackie Cation. Those are the kind of comics I wish to be. Greg Fitzsimmons is another perfect example.
Great one.
I don't want to be
really
a household
good dude.
name.
Really good dude.
Oh, he great. Of my podcast, he was my favorite episode. Hands down, like my number one favorite. He was an incredible guest. I told him some fucked up stuff he said to me years ago when I was a host, and we laughed about it. But like, I'm optimistic that I can do something with it in the next 2 to 3 years.
Well, I'm optimistic that it'll happen probably sooner than that. So for fans and future fans of Pat House, where can they learn more about you?
A simple Pat House search on all social media would do, because that'll take you out of my links. Because my link is, and I'm going to say it, is at Bohemian Pat City. Bohemian, PATSODY, which people either love or hate. It's 75 love, 25% think is stupid. I think it's fantastic.
Remy Malek thinks it's fantastic. We're going to link to it too, because it's awesome. It's a great handle.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that was my AOL instant messenger screen name in high school. So I'm not bragging, but I was that creative at 16.
Wow. Bringing it back full circle. Well, Pat House, thank you so much for joining us.
Dude, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I would love to do it again.